You ready to do it?
Yep.
All right, ladies. Here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Corey Glied and Anna White. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Welcome. So Dr. Corey Glied is a licensed clinical psychologist born and raised in New York. She worked for over 15 years in city hospitals, providing both patient care and academic training, and has maintained a private practice in Manhattan since 2010, where she provides evidence-based treatments for anxiety, depression, and stress to a wide range of conditions. Anna White is a former Wall Street executive who experienced severe burnout and subsequent chronic illness during her years in the corporate sector. Type C traits, which we're here to talk about today, were a significant contributor to her declining health. After leaving corporate life, she founded a specialty care package company called Rest and Heal. So today, now, is it correct to say that you're both founders of the Type C Toolbox?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, really curious to talk about Type C behaviors and so forth, but welcome to the podcast.
We're excited to be here.
Awesome. So before we get going here now, Corey, as I stated in the interview, you're from New York, but share with the listeners, both of you, where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm originally from the South, so born in Tennessee, lived in Tennessee and North Carolina through my childhood and early 20s, moved to New York City in 1999, and I've been here ever since. Live on the Upper West Side, same neighborhood as Corey, which is how we know each other.
I am a born and raised New Yorker. I would like to say I did leave for 4 years in college. I went all the way to Minnesota, so I've had my out of New York City's experience, and I have lived in Europe briefly, and then I came right back to the Upper West Side in New York City.
Awesome. All right. So how did Type C, the Type C Toolbox, okay, first of all, how did you both meet?
Well, our children are elementary school classmates. So we met when they were in kindergarten together.
And now they're in 9th grade. So it's been a long time.
It's been a long time. It's been a long time. And the way this whole thing sort of came together was I was reading this book about cancer, and there was this little section in the book around Type C as it relates to cancer. And when I read the list of what Type C means, it just resonated with me at the highest level. So Type C traits are people who are excessively nice, hate letting other people down, carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, can't bear the thought of disappointing anyone, feel really, really, really guilty when we say no, we can't set boundaries. We go to extreme lengths to avoid conflict.
People pleasers.
People pleasers, but a little bit complex than that. And so Corey and I had done some work together around my wellness business. And I brought up this notion of Type C to her, saying, I've never heard of it described like this before. And I think this fits me to a T. And we were having dinner one night.
Right. We were having dinner one night on the Upper West Side. At a very yummy new Malaysian restaurant. And Anna and I had done this work together before, talking about health and wellness. And I was kind of itching to do something more. And Anna described this Type C. And I was like, wow, a lot of my patients really struggle with that. I had never heard of Type C before, but that's something that I regularly see and regularly talk to people about. And we talked about, what would that look like if we were going to do something around it? And then that's really where the Type C Toolbox project came along, that we decided to work on some sort of educational platform that helped people understand what Type C is all about. It can be lovely and wonderful to be a little Type C, but when it is taken to the extreme, in Anna's case, and in a lot of my patients' case, it leads to exhaustion, anger, resentment, people struggling with a lot of anxiety, a lot of guilt. It can also lead to a lot of physical health issues. So chronic pain, chronic fatigue, a lot of pelvic issues, stomach issues, irritable bowel, migraines. So a lot of these things were things that Anna experienced, but I have a lot of patients who fall into these categories. So we decided to start a educational project, and then turned into our own podcast. And really, not a lot of people have heard of Type C, and there are some tips and strategies. Obviously, awareness is key, number one, but then there are things that you can do that are not easy, but there are things that you can work on to make changes so that you don't have the same types of health and illness issues that many people fall into the category, unfortunately, when you're really suffering.
So I'm assuming many people have heard of Type A, which is like the go-getter. Why don't, if you would, describe Type A, Type B, and give us a little context there?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, we think of Type A as people that are very driven, very competitive, can be sort of aggressive, veer towards perfectionism, go, like you said, go-getters. Type B, a little more laid back, more flexible, more passive, can be indifferent at times. I mean, there are health risks with all of these personalities. And it's really when, like Corey said, they're taken to the extremes, when we really push the boundaries on these things, then that's when we see a deterioration in health.
Right.
So most, and then correct me if I'm wrong here, when we think of Type A, I think most often we probably think of men, but we do think of women, and probably with men, it's different perceptions, right? With men, it's like he's Type A, and when you think of a Type A woman, a lot of times people can have a negative perspective of that. Excuse me. Now with Type B, right, and then Type C, as you were talking about Type C, I was thinking, do women fall under that heading more, or women
here's the challenge. I think
diagnosed?
Women seek treatment more in general across the medical board with medical doctors, as well as with therapists and psychologists, psychiatrists. So I think it's easier to see them more. But over the course of my career, I've had not as many men, but definitely men that struggle with Type C.
And I think women can, this is maybe a blanket statement, but women can feel a little more powerless than men in a lot of situations, especially in the corporate sector. That's how I experienced corporate life. And I think that feeling of powerlessness is very sort of Type C, feeling like you really can't say no, that you really can't set boundaries, that you have to prove yourself even more than the men do. And so I think that's, that's an element.
I think another thing is that I think that women are more likely to be rewarded for people-pleasing behavior, whereas a man may not be rewarded for that. And certainly, I mean, Anna talks about religion and the South as also really rewarding women who were nice and thoughtful and, did a lot for other people.
Right.
I mean, I know that actually in some Asian cultures, particularly in India, being very selfless is very lauded. It's very rewarded and appreciated.
Right. So there are a lot of cultural kind of specificities and complexities with this whole thing. So Anna, when you were reading this in this book, you were like, this is me. This is, did it become like, holy crap, how do I deal with this? Did you seek treatment for this?
Well, at that point, I had kind of done a lot of work on myself to try to get to a better place. So I wasn't at rock bottom when I read this. I had hit rock bottom several years earlier, but I had never heard it sort of described in these terms. And the real low point of my health was after I had my second child. I went on maternity leave and worked straight through the whole thing and really burnt myself out. And that was a function of just being absolutely Type C. I worked for a very small firm. They were under-resourced. I felt extreme guilt about leaving them in a lurch, going on maternity leave. And so I offered to pitch in during my maternity leave, which is just, one of my biggest regrets in this life. But I think, there was a sincere offer to help, but then on the other side, there was a real taking advantage of a Type C person. And I mean, the sad part of this story is that I gave birth the next day in the hospital. The boss calls to say, hey, we really need to get going on this deal.
Oh God, no.
Can't make it up. Can you get these investor letters out And, Type C people default to yes, that's what we do. We don't even stop to think about it. If somebody needs us, we can't disappoint them. We can't let them down. We say, yes, I'm there for you. And so I literally went home from the hospital and the next day started working on this deal. 7 weeks of, working, nursing my child at the same time, up all night, calling, investors all over the world. The whole thing was completely bonkers. But at the end of it, I was a physical wreck. And it's just taken years to recover from that. It was just, yeah.
Listening to you, first of all, thank you for sharing that. But listening to you say that, I'm thinking, I can identify, parts of me can identify. And I know a lot of people listening can identify with that too. And people listening are probably going, just as I am, like, how crazy is that? But a lot of us do it. So how do you address this? How do you fix this?
Well, let me actually just jump in one sec, because I was going to say that one of the really interesting things that when Anna and I first met, a couple of years ago on the Upper West Side at our little dinner, I thought, oh, wow, this is so interesting. I see this in a lot of my patients, right? But since then, I start to see it in myself. I think it's Anna, we talk about how Anna definitely, her worst Type C traits were work related, but as I've learned more about this and understood, I can realize that I can get stuck in this with my kids. And so the first part is awareness. So the first part is recognizing that there may be some sort of rules that you have for yourself that you're not really aware of. So many people with Type C have grown up in households that either there was some sort of trauma, or there was some sort of abuse or excessive mental illness, or sometimes perfectionism or criticism, but there was some reason or environmental factors that led to someone thinking either my needs are lesser, or it's safer or more helpful if I just, make make people happy, make sure that people are taken care of. My needs, are not as important. I'm going to keep things more to myself. I'm going to really make sure that I take care of other people. So that was not necessarily the case in my household, but I think whether it was environment or being a woman or certain circumstances, I definitely can get sucked into doing too much for my kids. And then that leads to anger and resentment. And I see it. And I think it's so helpful to have this understanding that it's not healthy mentally or physically for us. And so
if I may, what I'm hearing too is almost a hesitancy and maybe even an inability to engage with someone and to stand up for ourselves and say, you know what, I'm not really sure, or I can do that, or you know what, I don't have time to do that. It just reminds me, there's this woman on Instagram who is very funny. She does these, she shows herself as doing these, she plays this like corporate person, and she provides both sides of the conversation. One's a polite side, and one's the kind of type A boss saying, you know what, Doreen, I'd really love you to come in today. And and this woman gives the other side. Anyway, it just reminded me of that. But I'm hearing, and I can relate to sometimes I don't want to engage. I don't want to, rock the boat.
Right.
And on the far end of the continuum, stand up for myself, or God forbid you have an argument or a disagreement.
Right, exactly. And so the first part is noticing, right? You can't make any changes unless you're aware. So I would say, what are the things that we talk about? We talk about first noticing, are you doing this? Maybe why are you doing this? You don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out why, but it's really just about understanding there's a reason, not beating yourself up about it. There's probably a reason somewhere. It could be multifactored, but there's probably a reason. And then it's about a willingness actually to sit with discomfort. We talk about, often we feel guilty if we don't do certain things, or we feel worried if we don't do certain things. So really what we talk about on the platform is, could you sit with that? would you be willing to, in order to make sure that you take care of yourself and you're not completely ignoring yourself, sit with some guilt, sit with some worry? What happens? What are the costs when you just give into that worry and guilt? How does that hurt you? How does that maybe lead to anger so that you're not as great to be around? How does that make you more tired? Would you be willing to try exploring sitting with guilt and not doing the thing that you feel you need to do, and just be on a journey, explore, well, what happens if I do that? It's not easy at all.
Of course.
You know, our bodies are made to protect us from danger. We have the fight or flight response. We have anxious feelings that really try to help us not put ourselves in danger. So we're really talking about doing the opposite of what feels comfortable, which is hard.
And another thing that we do is a lot of times Type C people are not comfortable using their voices. We have not used our voices for many, many years. So we don't have the language that we need in certain situations. And so what we really try to do is provide people some very, very practical tools. When someone comes to you and they're asking you to do something and you are somebody who just defaults to yes, what can you say in that moment? What can you do in that moment to buy yourself some time, to say no thoughtfully and gracefully? You know, how can you just work in a way that's going to put yourself in a better position to not take all this on like you're so accustomed to doing? So we really try to just focus on very, very practical things that people can do.
So one of the things we talked about with Anna and the maternity leave, when the boss calls her, like, what do you do in that moment? You're frozen. Oh my God, you feel guilty, right? So a great thing is called the delay tactic. We did not make this up. This is something that's, you know, available to anyone. It's part of the assertiveness training toolbox. But can you say something like, let me think about that. Can I get back to you? Let me talk with my husband about that. Or I need to check my schedule. Any type of delay tactic so that you can slow down and really think about, if I do this, will this hurt me? Right. If there's flexibility, we're not saying you never say yes.
Right.
It's just not defaulting always to yes. And then we have a whole list of ways to say no that a Type C person can handle, right? Because you can't just say, like your example of the Instagram person, you can't just be kind of bossy and say, well, no, I can't, right? You have to say it. For a Type C person to be able to say no, they have to say it in a way that they feel comfortable with. And people may not have actually had that experience practicing that. Maybe you grew up in a household or a cultural environment where you really couldn't say no. So you really just don't have that skill. We also talk a lot about being kind to yourself. Just, you know, not blaming yourself. Lots of people struggle with this. And there are tools that can be helpful.
So let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Anna White and Dr. Corey Glied, the Type C Toolbox project. Now, so this is a platform. Now, what do you offer on this platform?
We have a blog. So we have a website that has, over 100 blog posts now. It's so funny because when we first started this, we thought, are we going to have enough material to create a blog? And I'm sure you're the same. Like the ideas just keep coming and people have ideas and there's just so much that we want to talk about. So we have a full blog. We've got some resources on our website, like a cheat sheet. We've got some, therapist recommendations, but we have a podcast. We have about 45 episodes. We have an Instagram feed where we try to post something daily. We're pretty good about that.
And we've started working on workshops and training. So we've given a couple of talks and we're working on some workshops. But, for the most part, the idea is to try to make people not feel so alone, create some of this community, make people realize that we have these resources, and also try to think about ways to get into businesses so that we can be talking to team members, managers, and helping them realize Type C people are some of your best employees. You don't want to lose them to burnout. So teaching them and giving educational options for them to realize, Anna, you know what? You've been working really hard. I'm not going to add another project to your plate. Or Anna, I see you haven't taken that much vacation. I think you need to take some vacation, right? So I have had lots of patients who have gone on either medical leave or quit jobs, and that's not good for employees.
And type C people will not tell you how they truly feel. We do a lot of lying or massaging of the truth because we want to avoid the conflict. We don't want to let you down. And so it's very hard for someone with these traits to say, I'm really struggling. I need to take a step back. You know, sometimes we just tend to operate in more extremes. Like, I just have to leave. I just have to get out, you know, instead of really addressing, you know, trying to come up with a solution that's a little bit less extreme.
Right.
Yeah, this is really interesting to me because I think so many of us have at least some traits of what you're talking about. And just to be clear, this is not an official diagnosis, right? I
No,
mean, it's
but
not in
we
the,
cannot make it up on our own. So Anna was reading this book, and there has been research done on type C traits related to cancer, predominantly in the 70s. And the things that they found were that it leads to actually a worse prognosis. So if you think
right,
about the type A person as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about themselves and who's kind of a fighter, the
right.
type B person is kind of lax. But the type C person is really very like suppresses a lot, which is never good for a prognosis and isn't really a fighter. So,
Mhm.
you know, we're not saying that there is any medical, you know, blame here in any way, but it is a real trait. And as you know, type A and type B were also developed related to illness, heart disease. So, you know, I think it's really just something to work on. It's no, you know, let's be aware of type C too. We all know about type A and type B.
So you talked about you know, giving talks and so forth, and um, can we get a little specific? Talk, maybe do a little case study of people you've worked with, some of the things they've presented to you, and how they show up, and maybe how you would work with them. What would you suggest, for example?
Sure. Well, we can either talk about you.
Sure, we can talk about me.
I mean, do you want to give another one of your examples?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I don't even
Make
know.
mistakes one. That's a good
Yeah,
one.
okay. Yeah. Well,
So this is what we talk about on the blog. So on the website, each entry has to do with sort of a specific type C situation that people struggle with. And
Okay.
then we go over the tools that you can use. So we've got a lot of these, but let's do making mistakes is the big one.
Making mistakes is the big one. I was also just thinking about like my history of not being able to unplug or take vacations.
Mhm.
I think this is a very type C thing to do. So I had a boss once upon a time who just kind of frowned on vacation, but the company itself didn't frown on vacation. And so I really internalized that and didn't want to let the team down, didn't want to let her down. And so, you know, I took a lot less vacation than I could have or should have. I needed it. And just this like boundaryless sort of like going into the evening, checking emails all, you know, all through the evening up until bedtime, first thing in the morning, checking emails, responding, not just checking, but responding. And, you know, I think, you know, companies like that. They love people that are sort of giving that much of themselves, but at the end of the day, that's not a really healthy thing to do. And so, you know,
And why, Anna, did you do that? Because why?
it's just this pathological need to be available to people, to not disappoint them, to not let them down. There's also this element of type C, which is kind of painful to talk about, but where you feel a little bit lesser than everyone else. And so you're feeling like you really need to prove yourself that much more. And maybe that comes from whatever happened as a child, but somewhere along the way, you got the message that your needs were not as important as other people's needs. So there's a real prioritization of everyone else over yourself. And, you know, for me, it was just default autopilot. I didn't even question like this behavior. I just did it because it was pathological. I needed to make sure that people knew that they could count on me, they could rely on me, and that I was there for them.
Yeah.
I would say that is something that would be true of all the people that I've seen over the years who are, you know, in this guise, these type C traits, that there is a feeling of lesser, a feeling I need to prove myself.
Lower self-esteem.
Yeah, it's not, I would say it comes more, you know, surprisingly, people can think they're really good at their jobs, but it's not as obvious as low self-esteem. They're not sort of people you think of as that way. They're people who can be very successful, but underneath that, if you ask them, they will say, so again, it's a facade. You know, they will not, it's not as obvious. You wouldn't pick them out that they're not shy, but they're definitely people who work so hard to make sure that they don't make anyone unhappy, they don't disappoint people. So, you know, I mean, I've had many patients over the years. Sometimes it's at work where they're just, like Anna was talking about, working excessively, taking work home, having a harder time on, you know, stopping work. Or sometimes it can be at home with kids, where I see, you know, just working so hard to make kids happy and burning yourself in that way. I've had patients, unfortunately, who've really hit rock bottom because they're doing this to themselves and wake up thinking like, you know, I don't want to go on, having passive suicidal thoughts. And the hard part also, I would say, is that a lot of times when people do so much for other people, whether it's at a job or for friends or family, if you start to change that, not everyone in your life loves that. So that's another thing we talk about, which is that if, like, I had a patient and she was, you know, wanted to take medical leave, she was passively suicidal, having a hard time getting to work. And we talked about like, okay, now you're making these changes, whether you like it or not, you know, you gotta, anxiety and guilt, you know, we need you got to stop working. You got to do this, you got to do that. And the work commented, right? She used to be the 150%er. And so they weren't seeing as much put out product from her. And they weren't so happy with that. And, you know, I was bummed out, but I also realized like, you're going to get this. And definitely Type C people can be susceptible to relationships where they either have a friend who's a taker, or in worst case scenarios, they're very susceptible to abusive relationships, whether it's with a you know, friend or an intimate partner. And so sometimes partners and friends are not as happy with you when you make these changes. And
this
so
is deep.
Yes.
This is deep. I mean, what I'm getting here is almost a feeling of a lesser, you said it, Anna, self-worth.
Yeah.
But like the space that I take up isn't as valuable as the space that you take up.
Right.
You know, and this is really, I know people listening to this are like, oh my God, you know, part of this is me. I can't step into, I can't engage. I can't say, you know, I can't even say, you know what, hang on a second. Let's talk about this tomorrow, or let me talk to my partner about it. You know, creating that space, that is, I can't even think about that. It's too much, you know?
And one of the things we talk about is that's not going to change. That may be a part of you, but it's an awareness and also noticing how does that drive your behavior that hurts you in the long run.
Right.
So a huge part of our work is explaining to people and getting you to ask yourself, what is the cost, right? All these changes are really difficult. You know, people may not be as happy with you in the worst case scenarios, and you may feel guilt, you may feel anxiety. Why would you do that? That sounds horrible. So it's really about recognizing if you continue to act in this way, what's the cost? What's the cost on your health? What's the cost on your mental health? How much anger are you feeling? How much fatigue and exhaustion are you feeling? Would you be willing to try something different, which is really hard? But ultimately, it's about being willing to care about yourself. And when you feel lesser, that is so hard. So that may not change, but are you willing to act in a different way? Even though you may feel this way deep down, would you be willing to act? I always like to, if I can find anyone, you know, if someone has a child, do you want to be role modeling this behavior? Is this how you grow up? Or, you know, any type of example, what would you say to a friend in this situation? Because that can help people get out of themselves.
What are you, nuts?
Right,
How
exactly.
are you? You're not gonna take your maternity leave?
Right.
Oh my God. All right. So as we kind of wind down here, you also have a podcast. What's the name of your podcast?
Type C Toolbox. We are
Awesome.
sort of across the board Type C Toolbox.
Well, smart. I mean, awesome name. That's awesome name. So, and who do you have on the podcast?
Sometimes it's us, and then frequently we have guests. guests, and then we have all types of anything related to health, really, mental health and physical health. We've had an acupuncturist on, we've had a naturopathic doctor, we had a sleep doctor on, just anything that sort of intersects with Type C and health. We love to talk to experts in their field, talk to them about, hey, do you have any Type C patients? And how does that sort of manifest in your world? And talk to us about that. It's been such an amazing learning experience.
We also had a lawyer who is very not Type C, and but she's a woman and she sort of understands that, the pitfalls. And so that was really fun because she talked about ways that she stands up for herself. She talked about posture. And so we just like to find people that we think would be beneficial for someone who has Type C to hear from.
Well, awesome. All right, ladies, as we kind of wind down here, how do people contact you? Well, let me ask you before you answer that. So they're going to go to your website, typectoolbox.com, and you have the blog. What are you offering on the website to help people?
So we've got the blog, which is about 100 posts. We've got some resources. We've got a cheat sheet of all of our strategies so that it's like a little handy dandy, like 1-page reference of like, here's all, so you don't have to dig through the blog, but here's like the 10 things that you need to think about strategy wise. We're working on a book. So we are actively collecting stories from Type C people. We've done 7 or 8 interviews now, and the stories that we're getting are just so incredibly powerful. And we're always looking for more if anybody's interested in that. So that's on our website, a contact.
So if anyone listens to the podcast and is interested in contacting us, you can either contact us on our website. It's typectoolbox@gmail.com. You can send us a message on Instagram, which is also Type C Toolbox. But we are working on this book, and we would love to hear people who want to share their story. We make them anonymous. It's over Zoom, so it's very easy.
Yeah.
Very cool. I'm just adding you on Type C Toolbox right now. Very cool. Ladies, awesome. Super interesting, super inspiring. Anna, thank you for sharing your personal story. Really appreciate that. And ladies, I'd love to have you back at a later time.
Anytime.
I'd love to keep abreast of what you guys have going on here. Again, typectoolbox.com. We'll have it linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Take care.